Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS show for this week. And hope that we're going to have a good discussion, definitely around a topic that is near and dear to many of us. Just remember as you join to let us know where you're joining from so that we can uh, uh, recognize you, as well as I hope that you will be sharing your thoughts and comments with us as we go along as well. So, Anton, you want to open up our topic for today?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. As always, on the Human SOS show, we talk about stress in some shape or form. It's all about making sure that we live in a humanly sustainable way. Society has been heading in a direction that's not very humanly sustainable. Stress affects us in many different areas. And we talk about three main categories. We talk about health, we talk about life, and we talk about work and leadership. So, main thing is that we haven't talked about life for a little while. So I was like, hey, why not talk about parenting? I feel like I am stressed out to the gills myself because I have three children myself, ages 16, 10, and 3. Two, the oldest are girls, youngest one's a boy, and been doing, mostly full-time single parenting, and it's been pretty challenging. And honestly, like, as I was talking to Kevin, I'm like, I think I'm screwing my kids up. Like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. I don't know what I'm, raising here. I don't know how things are going. Perfect example. I had to, sit in church listening to the pastor this past Sunday, get a text message. You got to come pick up your son. I'm like, oh God, what did he do now? And had to leave church early because this little almost 4-year-old wouldn't listen to the people that are working in the child center. He just kept running around and going places he wasn't supposed to be going. And I'm like, how embarrassing. This is awful. Right. And just my mind is racing. I'm thinking about all these awful things and telling myself these bad stories. But the reality, he's just a kid, and that's what kids do. And it doesn't make me a horrible parent, it doesn't make him a horrible kid. They were really nice about it. They were like, hey, we try to tell him 3 times, you know, next time just make sure, hopefully he'll listen better. Like, just go take him home and relax. So it just made me want to talk about it. I want to get advice from the audience. I want to get advice from Kevin. I want to chat about, the things that are stressing us out as parents. I know some of you are parents of young kids, some of you are parents like Kevin, kids that are older, and some that have parents of kids that have kids of their own. So the topic today is just how parenting is stressful.
Welcome to Rick and Sonu and Sharon. Glad to have you with us this morning, afternoon, whatever it is, and where you're at anyway. For Anton and I, it's morning, and especially for Anton, it's early morning. And Rick makes a definite truth statement here. Parenting is not for the faint-hearted, especially in today's world. Indeed, that is the challenge that we face. Welcome, Andrea. Glad to have you with us. And One of the things that I've always shared now, just so you know my background, I've got 5 children and I have 5 grandchildren. And so I've seen a lot of different angles to this thing called parenting. One of the things that I tell people, it is the greatest challenge that we will ever face. But the balance to that is it's the greatest blessing we will ever have as being a parent or a grandparent. It is just such a key part of life. And when we own it, we can really, uh, yes, it's going to be stressful, but we can also get recharged from it. But we've got to keep it in the right perspective. And I like Anton's comment earlier, just because it's not going perfectly along doesn't mean that we have messed up necessarily. It doesn't mean that our children are doomed. There are a lot of different factors in it, and learning to keep it in perspective is an important thing to help us manage our stress. Andrea makes a comment. She says, the nicest part, we grow with them. Nobody should expect to know it all at once. Very true, Andrea. That is so key, because there is a lot of wisdom out there related to parenting, but there is nowhere that gives us a formula or exact answers all the time. And by the way, hello, Lydia. I don't think I recognized you a little earlier, but yes, we're growing together as parents. And then it was really interesting for me that uh, I guess because I started parenting when I was so young, I wasn't aware enough to be as concerned maybe as I might have needed to be. So when I became a grandparent, I was much more aware, and I probably approached being a grandparent more thoughtfully than I did being a parent. And
So you
so
think you're a better grandparent than you were a parent?
more aware.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I struggle with is, you know, grandparenting for a lot of people is a time of having fun, quote unquote, and spoiling the grandchildren. And having worked with kids over the years, I can't buy into that, because I've seen what spoiling grandchildren does to the grandchildren, and I can't, I just can't bring myself to do it. So I'm a little peculiar in that I don't march to the drum of my job is to spoil them. Now,
How
please,
old were you when you had your first one?
I was 20.
Oh, okay.
First child when I was 20.
Yeah, yeah, no, I got you. I
So I
got
need to clarify that. Hello, Professor Jagdish. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you as always. So, what are some of the things that you're stressing with right now, Anton, as a parent?
honestly, like it's a constant debate, and like me and my girlfriend are very different in parenting. She's got two kids of her own, um, and she is very like I would call her a much better parent than I am, and she thinks I'm a better parent. Like one thing that stresses me out is like how much how much do I come to the rescue for my kids, right? How much do I protect them from the world? How much do I, try to soften the blow of the world, and she says like they're meant to be kids, right? Let them be kids as long as they can. They don't need to prepare for, the toughness of the modern world. And I was raised a little different. I was raised to be prepared for anything and kind of handle things myself. And that's it's kind of that opposite end of the spectrum, right? Protect your kids, step in, take care of things, help them out. Or on the other end of the spectrum, maybe I'm a little bit too far on that end, is like, just let them handle it, as long as they're not going to get hurt long term. Let them kind of go with it and see where things turn out. And I'm kind of presenting this with a bias, as almost like mine is more positive, but at the same time, like my kids face some tough conversations sometimes. For me, sometimes they don't get the support that they maybe should be getting. So it's like finding balance between when to step in and help my kids and when to just let them go on their own and figure it out.
Balance is a key, like we talk about in all areas of our life. Balance is such a key. And yes, they're finding the times to just let go and let them fail on their own and learn from their consequences versus intervening. That's a tough one. There's not again a magic formula for that. I think that's the value. Part of the value in having two parents is that each parent usually brings one aspect of that balance, uh, typically naturally, one way or another. And so when you're single parenting, you got to work harder on finding that balance, and to um, figure out how to do the part that we're not the strongest in. I know for me, I am, as a parent, uh, very much on teaching them to become independent, and letting them deal with their consequences and so on. And so when I'm dealing with children, grandchildren on my own, I have to remember that at moments we have to be there and wrap our arms around them and protect them, and so on. And so that it's tough. And I guess that's one reason I continue to push more and more for how to get wisdom, because gaining wisdom is a key to a lot of things, including parenting. Uh, and welcome, Dr. Muhammad. Glad to have you with us also. And Richard, been a while, Richard. Good to see you. Let's see, Anton. I think we've got some comments. I don't want to. Rick's perspective. Children are humans just like us. We weren't perfect either. Oh, don't tell me that's so.
No,
uh,
and I think that this one, and kind of like my story, it's tough, like, because we feel like we start to tell ourselves stories like, oh, people think I'm a bad parent. And what I think a lot of times happens, and I see for myself and other parents, when their kids do something bad, we think that everybody thinks we are made to look poorly. But I'm like, especially with childcare providers, like they have seen it all. Like they've seen so many different versions of kids and the behaviors. They're not going to sit there and say just because a kid's misbehaving, you're a bad parent. They understand that kids go through phases. I mean, this guy is almost 4 years old. He's learning to be independent. He's expressing himself, finding personality. So I think that what stories we tell ourselves in those moments is very important, because a lot of times that can just run and in a bad direction, and we start feeling awful, where the reality is nobody's actually thinking that.
Welcome, Brett. Glad to have you with us. Been a while. Good to hear from you as well. The Well, I think the challenge that we have to approach is, first of all, as parents, what is our ultimate goal? And as I understand, our ultimate goal is to get our children to a point where they can live and function on their own, because at some point, natural, normal order of things, we are going to precede our children, and therefore there's going to be a time where we won't be around to guard them, protect them, and the most caring thing we can do is to make them ready to be able to endure and be strong in those situations. And that's hard, because so ultimately we are looking to disconnect from them in some part of our relationship, and that's an inevitability, or should be. And I think part of the problem we see today in our culture is we have parents that don't let go, and they still try to protect and or control the lives of their kids. And when we get caught up in that, it creates situations that are, I think they are unnatural for us, unnatural for the kids. And then, especially when grandkids come along, then it throws a dynamic in there that was not really intended to be. And let's see, Rick makes a comment I think kind of fits here. He says, I agree with Kevin on grandparenting. Our kids keep reminding us we treat the grandsons differently. We probably do, and we should, because our relationship is different between us and grandchildren than us and children. Now, part of what I've had to just maintain and be aware of is my role is not to undermine my children and torture them because of what they were like as kids. And there is a parent curse, and it does happen where we, even if we don't cause it to happen, and that is that as parents, we get our children's behaviors that come along, and they're much like what we did when we were young. And so it's that what comes around goes around kind of thing, and it's true in parenting. The other thing that this for me helped a lot is learning that one of the aspects of parenting is leadership. And whether we understand it or accept it, as a parent, we should be a leader for our children. And when we can apply some of the principles of leadership with our children, it changes things. We, as just like our behaviors towards people that are on our teams, if we were to treat them like we do parenting, what would be the outcome? And ultimately, we're trying to get our young people, our children, to become that productive person, that person that is living in an abundant way, the way we hope they can and will. And one of the things that I find and observe of parents is parents try to relive their life through their kids. And that's a grave error. We have to recognize that, that that we made mistakes and they're going to make mistakes. But trying to correct our mistakes through their lives is unhealthy, and for both the parent and the child. And the other piece is, even though they're like us in many ways because they are genetically connected to us, at the same time, they are still different. And part of what we have to do is learn to help them embrace their uniqueness.
It's interesting you're talking about, parenting and leadership. That analogy is often used, but in my mind, and I think in minds of many other people, we think of that analogy as really one way. We think about how to be a leader, thinking about how being a parent, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's one feeding the other, but really they should be feeding both ways, because
Yes.
some of the things that I'm struggling with, I'm just literally sitting here and thinking, I'm like, am I having one-on-ones with my kids? Like, no, not enough, or a lot more with one than the other two, because just her interest, and I'm a lot more involved in the stuff that she does. It just works out that way. I mean, that's one of the most important things as a leader that we need to do, is spend one-on-one time building a relationship and understanding, day-to-day circumstances members. Well, the same thing goes for sitting down and being met. Where can I make their life easier? Things like that, right? And I think that's probably the first time I ever thought about this in my 36 young years, of trying to apply it the other way around. So yeah, that's a good comment.
Well, and again, ultimately, where we want our children to be is to be that excellent team member for themselves and for somebody else. So the principles really do work and are applicable in those situations many times. And again, we want them to be healthy, and we want them to be following their vision and growing into that. And that's what we should be doing as leaders with our team members. Let's see. A couple of comments. Rick makes a comment: teaching kids responsibility can be tough. Oh, it can be very tough, because one of the best teachers of responsibility is failing. And it is one of the more difficult things to do, to watch our children, and for those of us that are grandparents, to watch them fail. Because again, we want them not to have to deal with hurt and pain and things like that. But at some point, I don't care how protective, how much money, how much anything, they're going to face that. And if we're always trying to protect them from it, when they do ultimately face it, it will be devastating. For example, I mean, again, normal order of things, they're going to have to watch us go through the process of dying. And if we've been the one that's always protected and covered them when we start that process, it'll be devastating to them. They will potentially not even survive well as a result. And we've got to really be careful that we don't want to put them in that spot. Let's see here. Rick has another comment. There's no one size fits all in parenting. Indeed, indeed, there is not a mold that they all fit in that we can push them into, including our own mold. I watch a lot of parents trying to mold their children to be just like them, follow in the family footsteps, work or whatever, and it's can be really unhealthy. Let's see here. Lydia makes a comment. Every child is unique and special in many ways. They're beautifully and wonderfully made. So true. Recognizing their unique qualities and not trying to make them into what our qualities are, even though there are similarities that are going to be there. And as parents, I think that there is a part where we are forced to learn for ourselves through our children. And it's a hard thing to do because we go, wow, was I like that? And unfortunately, we have to say, uh-huh.
No, and it's interesting. You mentioned earlier, that's why it's important to have a balance of two parents. Like, I was talking to my ex recently, and I was like, the kids need you in their life more. Like, you got to find ways to be in their life more because there's weaknesses that I have. I am not an emotionally connected person. Like, I don't deal with emotions well. Like, I get logical instantly, right? Here's how we solve a problem. When kids coming to me talking about something, I'm like, all right, this is how we fix it. But we know that's not what they always need. Sometimes, just like any other human being, they just need to be heard. They need to understand that somebody's there for them, somebody's listening. It doesn't need to be always a solution. And, that's where I'm like, I need more of that other side energy so that way they find that balance versus always trying to be robotic. Like sometimes I find myself being.
Yeah, it really does matter. And also, now I'm probably step into something here that the variations between male and female children are important, and having a father and a mother to interact with them to be able to learn that the differences and appreciate them because they are great that we have differences. I think about a world of just us knucklehead guys, and I go, wow, that's scary. Uh, so let's see. Andrea has a comment. By the way, we really enjoy your comments and questions to us. That is the highlight of the show, not us talking. Andrea says, my oldest was seeking for boundaries every day again, and setting the boundaries again and again is exhausting. But this is what they're looking for to build their little values they need. It is so key. And again, I know people are going to maybe complain, but that's all right. The young men, young boys need hard, strong boundaries because they will test those boundaries again and again, depending on their personality and things. Some of them more than others are going to have to run headlong into that wall and bounce off of it and go, okay, that's a boundary that's not going anywhere. And the boundary is one quite often that is us. And like Andrea said, it can be so very tiring. I know one of my children was as strong-willed as they come, and battling against that strong will in order to help bring it into control was a constant thing. It just and it especially if you're trying to do it alone, it is just super exhausting.
And that
And
one's tough because like we don't want to kill the strong will, right? We don't want to suffocate that completely. We just want to contain it a little bit, but still teach them that it's okay sometimes to break boundaries because they're not the right boundary, right? Like just
Right.
because somebody said something, if it's not ethical, if it's not right, like if you don't believe in it, doesn't mean you just go with the flow. Perfect example, peer pressure, right? Like if everybody's
Mhm.
doing something, doesn't mean that you need to be doing that, right? So it's once again that balance word that we always talk about, and remembering both sides of the equation. And I think that's my biggest advice to people is remove yourself from the situation, whatever you're in with your child in the moment, and look at it. What are the two sides of the coin here, right? Don't just see it your way. Try to expand your view and think, okay, what are we really talking about in the big picture? And how do I see that there's always two sides? No matter what the situation is, there's always two sides, and you need to be understanding of that when you're teaching them, when you're correcting them, when you're, reprimanding them, whatever it may be.
One of the best phrases that I ever learned, and I'm now that I think back, I'm trying to remember where I picked this up. Wish I could say I was bright enough to come up with it myself, but I know better. But this phrase is so important, and that is that our job, our goal as a parent, is to break their will, but not break their spirit. It is so critical to find how to do that. And what makes it even more challenging is it's not the same for each of our own children. Uh, I had one of my sons was the super strong willed, and it was a constant battle. And but I had another son that had I dealt with him the way I dealt with the other one, the strong willed one, it would have crushed him. And then the another one of the children is somewhere in between. So going back, going back to I believe it's Rick's comment. It's not this whole thing of parenting and parenting well. Key thing is not for the faint-hearted. It is a challenge, a growth process, like I believe Andrea mentioned, that we need to be prepared for, because at the end of the day, the growth is not just for our children. It's for us also as we grow in character and develop and maintain our values and so on. Um, Brett makes a real salient comment. He says, "You're right. How can we expect children to be leaders if they don't see it at home?" Again, modeling the leadership as a parent has that certain value because we're role modeling. And the more our kids can see that, the better they're going to be prepared, starting with leading themselves, because we know that's such a key foundation. And then learning how to lead others if that's something that they will do. And one of the things to remind ourselves is at some point, odds are they're going to be a parent. And what we do sets the mold or model that they're going to be looking at. And so, how we choose to work with our children and lead them becomes real important in their future, not just ours.
Our kids will model our language. We all know that. You'll say something and they'll repeat it like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But they model our behavior too.
They
They
do.
see how we respond in situations. They see how we treat others. They see all that stuff. So spot on, Brett. I mean, that's really, really accurate. And the crazy part, right? I forget the stat. I might butcher this, but I think that 85% of their personality is set by year seven, right? So like we don't realize how much of that, including future leadership potential, is already baked in, and how hard it's going to be for them to undo some of the things that we may do by year seven, not being aware of what we're teaching them, of what we're showing them, what we're modeling is really the right word. So we definitely have to be careful, and it's something I constantly remind myself of. Yeah, they may be little kids, but they're going to be pretty close to set for the rest of their life by the time they're what, in second grade or whatever it may be. Like that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's when we help them form their value system, and they form their priorities, and uh, begin to affect their view of the world and how they're going to interact. It all starts very early. What we, as parents, first of all, yeah, other thing is we are responsible for our children, not anyone else, not the neighbors, not the schools, not the teachers. We are responsible for our children and them growing and learning and developing. Now, there are times we will uh, share, get help with that in different forms, but ultimately, that's our responsibilities. And dads, I'm going to lay a little heavy on you as far as educating children, according to wisdom much greater than mine and out of the Bible. It says you and I, as fathers, are the ones that are responsible for our children's education. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to physically teach them, but when it comes time to consider education options, boy, we need to be really aware and really take on that responsibility, because it is such a big factor. And what we really hope is that we can find ways for the to support and encourage the values that we want our children to have. And uh, we wanted, this is again one of those tricky things, we want them to be unique because they are unique. We want them to find that and learn and grow into it. But there are some basic core values that we also have to build into them, because if we don't, they're not going to be anchored to weather the storms they're going to face. And if we overprotect our children, boy, we are going to set them up for a lot of pain and failure. And by the way, a lot of pain and failure for ourselves. Um, One of the phrases I used to tell parents, and I still offer it up, you either pay now by taking time with them, by making the effort to invest in helping them grow, and do that early on. It's hard, it's not fun always, but if we don't do it then, we'll pay later. And take that to the extreme of our children getting in trouble, going to jail, whatever, making harmful, destructive decisions later. So if we don't invest in them, like Anton said, in that early stages of life, we're going to pay a price later. It's not if, it's a matter of when and what. So as parents, one of the best things we can do is structure our life and our world when our children are younger, to be able to help them get that core value strengthened, and that anchor built in their life. Such a key piece. And yet we as parents want to do autopilot or depend on everyone else one way or another to do that. And that's really scary. And it's also why we see children now, teenagers, that are making very destructive decisions, including, this is a real problem, is teen suicides are on the rise. And it's because they're not anchored. They don't have the values that can help them navigate and survive life. I mean, what do we talk about, Anton, from a business standpoint? You got to have your core values. If you don't, things are a mess.
Yeah, I know it's tough to live without them in a modern world. And Richard's got a good comment there. It's not been an easy road for so many kids. They've been stuck in front of screens and made to learn in a way that really hasn't met their needs. It's so true, right? Like it's just the world over the last 3 years, 4 years have been so different. I mean, it's been different all along. It's always different, right? Like it's not like it's ever the same. It's not like all of a sudden it's just something that never existed change. But I feel like the rate of change with
Mm-hmm.
technology has been so fast and your lives are so different. And coming back to that balance word, right? Like how much do I try to keep my kids away from technology and limit their interaction with it and things like that versus how much does that make them feel alienated from their peers? How much are they having to be different and feel different or experience life differently, right? How much of that do I allow, and how much do I step in and say, yes, in the short term, maybe it's a little bit of pain. Here's do some of it, but in the long run, I know that it's going to help you. Like it's that constant battle, I think, in all parents' minds. Like how do I deal with technology? It's something that unfortunately we burn out as parents, and technology becomes a babysitter because we don't have the gas left in our tank at the end of the workday to come in and engage. So it's much easier to turn TV on. It's much easier to give them a tablet or a phone and then have them just get consumed by that while we just turn off our brain because we're so burnt out. And it just reminds me how important it is for us as parents to take care of ourselves, right? Like I think that a lot of the problems that I'm seeing with kids is because parents are burnt out.
Mm.
Burnout is way worse than we even imagine, folks. I'm just
Hmm.
telling you, I talk about this all the time. There's so many statistics. World Health Organization has made it a real thing where we have a burnout epidemic. But what we don't realize, and why I preach so often, how many symptoms of burnout we don't attribute to burnout. We
Hmm.
attribute to something else, some other thing, and we put names and labels, and every few years it's a different label. But when you pull out and look at the 30,000-foot view, you see that it's all just burnout. It just shows up in different ways. If we saw that, we'd realize that it's a lot more percent of people that are experiencing burnout on a regular basis than it is. And I'm talking about double or triple what we currently, estimate.
Well, and just to kind of take that a little further, part of the reason we burn out is we're trying to live in a way that we're not made to live. We're not, both individually and culturally. There are designs in place. There are norms. There are, kind of universal values. And when we don't acknowledge those and build that in as part of it, we're in a constant battle against ourselves or against other things that we shouldn't be. I still maintain part of the reason that we have work burnout is we've got so many people trying to do work that they're not designed to do. They made choices about work and education based on pressures from other people and even bad pressures on the part of parents. And as a result, they're trying to spend a good bit of their time doing something that doesn't fit them. And to me, that's kind of one of the very definitions of stress is trying to be and do something that we are not designed to be and do. And if we are always with living in that kind of vein, everything else just is going to pile on top and we're going to not survive. We're not going to be sustainable. Let's see. More good comments. Richard makes a comment, dads want to fix things for their kids. Well, we're fixers. That's kind of the natural thing. And that's something that we also have to learn to deal with appropriately in our relationships with our spouses is we don't, as much as we want to fix things, sometimes we just got to smile and nod and be understanding and all. And that's, that's a tough one. I've
Yeah,
learned
it
that
comes
about.
from lack of being grounded. I
Mhm.
think that's one of the things that happens is we're not grounded enough. We're jumping to solutions instead of just letting things play out. And also, we're finding value. We're helping ourselves have value by fixing that. Instead of being grounded, taking the time to process the information and said, our value is not determined by how many things we fix. Our value is determined by being there for our kids, by being there for our spouses. And that shows up in different ways. They need the
Mhm.
help, let's jump in. But let's not assume they need the help just because we want to fix it to make ourselves feel valuable.
Well, and if we're always fixing it for them, they become morally and character wise weak because having to fix our own things and go through those things is part of how we grow and become strong and ready. Let's see. Sharon has a comment. Uh, Sometimes, depending on the situation, the kids might just need a hug and for you to tell them it's okay. One of the balances that is hard and is so key, there are going to be moments where we need to hug them and cry with them, but there are also going to be moments where we need to figuratively kick them in the backside and say, come on, get going, take care of this. And there is no magic formula. I'm still looking. If I come up with one, I'll be sure and write a book about it. And but there is no magic formula on what that looks like and how you use it from situation to situation, from kid to kid. Let's see. Rick's comment. Kids typically do what they see and hear. Oh, yeah. As a parent, you have to be careful with what you say and do. Church is very important in kids' lives, in my opinion. I agree with that. I think that that's part of the value of community is that you're in community with people that will echo the values that you have culturally. It doesn't mean that you're going to be lock, stock, and I think you start getting too extreme. That's when you get into cults and things like that. But yeah, church is a very important factor and a positive influence when we, as parents, make good choices in regard to it.
We talk about technology being babysitter. You need a break, go to church. Like honestly, that's one of my favorite breaks in the week. Like is just being able to go take them somewhere where I know with full confidence that they're going to, be taken care of. They're going to be led properly. They're going to get good messages. While I just get to breathe, relax, and sit and listen for an hour and a half. My church has been normally an hour and a half, but they've been shortening. I'm like, no, don't take my time.
Yeah, don't take away my refreshment time. Let's see. Andrea makes a comment. When we hear the oldest correct the younger one with the same words we've used on them, we have made the right impact. Hopefully, the right impact. There are times we go, oh, did they really hear me say that, or did they watch me do that? But yes, they're little mirrors. And if we want to see what we're doing and how we're doing, just watch them. They'll show you at some point along the way. Another comment from Andrea. Key one. Besides, keep in mind to love them no matter what. Do not condition your love. Of all things that is universal that we need to get is that we need to love our children. And just like Andrea said, unconditionally. And that's hard because so often we have been exposed to conditional love, and breaking that mold for ourselves is important. One caveat, though, is don't misunderstand what love is. Love has got a warm, fuzzy side to it, without a doubt. But sometimes love also has a tough side. And if we only approach loving them with the soft side or with the tough side, we're going to make errors and set the priority incorrectly. But the key is that love is never changed. That love is there regardless of what they do or don't do. And we need to model it, express it, show it, everything we can in that regard.
I love all of our audience, so nobody feel like I'm picking favorites, but that comment has probably been my favorite comment of the day, because I see what happens if we condition that love. Their value long term is going to become dependent on outcomes, dependent on what people say and do about them. It's never going to come from inside. If they're showered with love as kids and it's unconditional, that's going to fuel them in the long term. Their value is going to be fueled from within because they're not going to be trying to play catch up because they didn't get enough value growing up.
Well, and they're not going to be driven by looking for their value in wrong places, such as bad role models, such as bad behaviors in our culture.
There's predators out there, right? And I don't mean predators as in just like, rapists and child abusers or anything like that. I'm talking about predators that feed on people's emotions, like narcissists. We've talked about many months ago about narcissists, and narcissists will attach to people that are deprived of love, right? They're seeking that attention, they're seeking that love, they're seeking validation, and they become a really easy target for people that feed on that.
Let's see. Professor Jagdish makes a comment. Our grandchildren are more expert in handling modern gadgets, which we adults need to learn from them, giving them due credit. Again, this is not a one-sided process as parents. If we're not growing and learning along with our children throughout life, we're falling behind, both for them and for ourselves. And technology is just happens to be one of those things that is in our current culture, kind of a defining factor as far as that goes. Let's see. Rick has a comment. Technology is probably one of the biggest challenges for young parents. Tech becomes a babysitter. With both parents working, it makes a convenient sitter. And so true and so dangerous. If you're, especially if you're not careful what the technology is telling them. You know, we watch and we think, oh well, this is children programming. I, my values are very different than what others are in terms of what is children programming, and so to just say that somebody stamped that okay for all children, boy, I think that's dangerous because not all children are like even, and so again, yes, managing that is such a key part. Let's see. Richard makes a comment. Last year, GM spent more on mental health insurance for their employees than they did on steel. Stress is real, and it's been a struggle to show its effects in a positive way in a family. Richard, you kind of hit where Anton and I live, right, Anton?
Yeah, no, I love seeing companies doing that. I, I've been in the space for so long, and really the preventative side, we are not getting to the preventative side of mental health. We're not getting to things early enough, and people are seeking help once they kind of crossed over that threshold of either burnout or mental health challenges, whether it be depression, anxiety, many other things. We have to be more proactive. The things that people face on a daily basis, not just at work. That's the other part. We need to expand the areas where we're helping people. It's not just about better leadership at work. It's not just about better business processes, better people processes, people experiences. Mental health is being attacked in all places of life, all places of society. We have to A, expand our area of help, and B, get to it before people tip over the scales on the other end. Because once those scales are tipped over, when somebody experiences burnout, when somebody experiences depression, anxiety, it is much easier to continue to experience it. It takes less and less for us to get back to the place where we were, that bad place, even though we did a lot of work to recover. So that's just one thing that if you're leaders, if you're watching the show and if you're hearing us talk about it, it's a lot easier to help somebody before they experience the challenge. Early detection, early symptoms, normalizing conversation, all of those things have to start happening, and realizing that it's not just about mental health and health. Like they're two opposite ends of the spectrum. They're one and the same. I'm telling you, people that are healthy, they're physically fit, they're healthy, they're exercising, they're doing these things, they're much more resilient than the other people, right? And we have to look at it as one and the same.
That's why we talk about balance physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. If any of those aren't a part of your balance from a health standpoint, the rest of them are not going to be functioning correctly. That's why that is so important. Uh, Andrea, glad to have you today. Appreciate. She indicated she had to leave a little bit ago, so thanks for being here, though. Professor Jagdish says, with both parents on the job, children are often getting deprived of the valuable company, attention, and hugs that they deserve. Something that's a scary thought to me is that we put off that, especially young age children, we put off or put them with other things and people. And what we don't realize is, do we want them to model after those other things and people? If we don't, then we should not be exposing them to that. That it's just like, again, I seem to be stepping into things today, but our education system, one of the options for education is homeschooling. And having been a licensed teacher and been in and around education a long time, still maintain that homeschooling is the best option for majority of the kids, especially early on. But when one of the arguments against homeschooling is that they're not socialized well. Now, just think about that a minute. Do you want your children to be socialized by other under and undeveloped children? It's called peer pressure. Is that what we want as the primary role model for our children and how they learn to function in the future? Wow, I hope not. That's just not logical. They're learning, if that's the case, they learn how to stay children and do childish things. Whereas if they're exposed primarily first to us as their parents, and that's making certain assumptions that we're modeling behaviors. Now, if you're modeling bad stuff, then there may be worth considering other options. But if we're modeling the behaviors that they need to be successful in the world, their world, then we need them to be around us as much as possible in that fashion. Uh, some would say, oh, well, you're going to ruin them because you sheltered them and they're not ready. No, again, it can be done poorly. And part of that time is that while they're still under our protective umbrella, if you will, to allow them and encourage them to get exposed to other situations, but not as the primary teacher. The primary teacher should be us and modeling character and modeling good choices. And it's not necessarily about specific behaviors, it's about building that character in them. Because if we try to give them all the specific situation rules, we know how well that works. I mean, we've all learned from the book, and the first test of time in life, we get out there, it wasn't like that in the book. And so the key there is not to try to learn the solution to every situation, but learn the process of finding the best solution and behaving in the meantime. And that's where character comes in.
I think we've talked about many, different pieces of advice. I think, but foundationally, before any of it, I would say the two that stood out to me the most is be present in their lives and love them unconditionally. And that's a good
Mm-hmm.
foundation for any parent to start with. We're too worried about so many other things like their education, what school they go to, what extracurricular activities they're doing, screen time, you name it. There's just so many important things to consider, but oftentimes we forget to simply be present and loving them unconditionally. If you can do those two things, they're going to be okay. They're going to be all right. They're going to, survive life and pass that on to their kids. But if those two things are missing, you can think about everything else and anything else, and you may have a chance of screwing up your kids because they're just going to be missing those two vital pieces to human existence.
Well, and uh, we think that we owe our children a lot of things. And I'm here to tell you, as a parent, you don't owe or your children anything but this love that we're talking about. We don't owe them things. We don't owe them position. We don't even owe them trying to determine their future. What we owe them is that love and the character that comes from that love and that time with them early on. That's our obligation, not this other stuff. Because if you don't invest and you don't show and model and give that unconditional love to your children early on, the other stuff is only going to make it complicated. And in many times, it's going to cause them harm. We give them all this stuff and they have an expectation of stuff. And when circumstances don't allow them stuff, then they're devastated because they don't have that core to hold on to. Uh, for most of us, we become hopeless when we don't remember that core of the value of love and the value of who we are because of that love. And that's a big reason we watch our culture doing and being the way it is today. Such a big deal. Richard makes a comment. Uh, this is a timely, important topic, and I've never been as thankful to Team Andrea Cove and Ward for being there for me. Thanks very much. Oh, you're welcome, Richard. We try to look at things. We talk about different things to talk about on the show, and one of the key thing is what's real and what are we dealing with. And so glad that it works for you. So closing thoughts, Anton, as we're winding down quickly.
As parents, chances are you've done a great job if your kids are grown and they've made it. Like as a young parents, parents of young kids or young yourself, just do your best. Honestly, like just all you can do is try. You're gonna make mistakes. You're not gonna be perfect. Your kids are gonna make mistakes, and it's part of life, right? Like trying to be sterile as a parent is not the answer. Trying to be Mr. Right, Mrs. Right, whatever it may be all the time is not the answer, right? Put in effort, be present, love them unconditionally, and then everything else, just keep trying.
Yep. And recognize your children are not you. They weren't meant to be you. They're meant to be who they're created to be. Yes, they are connected, and yes, we're going to see ourselves reflected in them, but that doesn't mean we need to try to mold them into what we are or what we think we should be. We need to help mold and guide them into becoming who they are designed to be so that they can live in a way that is appropriate for them as they experience life. Such, so important. Don't try to make mini me's. The world doesn't need mini me's, especially in my case. They need more diversity, shall we say? But appreciate everyone hanging in there. Great comments. Thanks for the input. I know it helps me get reinforcement, encouragement, and learn new things when you guys comment. So we'll be back next week, Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock Eastern, to figure out some topics that we can learn and grow about, and especially related to stress and how to manage that in our lives. And so if you've got a suggestion, by the way, throw it out there. We love to address topics that you guys suggest. That helps us to know that we are addressing things that concern others, not just what we think of. So thanks, everyone. Have an amazing week. God bless. And we will see you guys in about a week. Take care.
Bye, everybody.